Welcome to Mr. Mutlow's Topic in 10 Minutes for A2 OCR Physical Education. This topic video is concerned with the Industrial Revolution. In simple terms, the Industrial Revolution describes the societal changes which occurred in the United Kingdom between approximately 1800 and 1900. These changes were widespread and included improved transport, urban migration to towns and cities, and an increase in machinery and technology. All in all, the Industrial Revolution saw the shift from two-tier feudal living, which was common in the Middle Ages, to a three-tier modern society, which is more reflective of what we are used to today. But what were the major societal changes which resulted from the Industrial Revolution, and how did they impact on sport? These are the questions we are going to try and answer in this video. The first, and perhaps most significant societal change which resulted from the Industrial Revolution was the emergence of a middle class. In pre-industrial Britain, we had simply two classes: the upper class gentry or landowners, and the lower class, formerly known as peasants. The upper class held the wealth, status and power. The lower class did much of the work, and the two classes rarely mixed. As a result of urban migration, a third group of people developed in society. These people were neither landowners nor agricultural farmers. They had jobs in factories, better standards of accommodation than those who lived rurally, and in some cases a greater disposable income. In essence, they are the middle class of today. With the emergence of a middle class came a change in attitudes, manners and expectations for people in all three classes, and this brought about a shift in the way in which society conducted itself. Equally, this impacted on sport as new sports developed, such as lawn tennis, which were popular with the middle class, who had garden space to play. These sports were often less complicated than the versions which the gentry played, such as real tennis, but more sophisticated than the rackets or fives often played by the lower classes, which were played against any kind of wall which could be found at a given time. A second significant impact of the Industrial Revolution was the shift from amateurism to professionalism, and the increasing divide between those two ideals. The concept of a gentleman amateur lived on within the gentry and the upper class, who thought that sport should be played for pleasure, and most certainly should not be played as a way of life. That said, the Industrial Revolution also brought with it money, and this went into the pockets of many of the middle class, who would then spend it going to watch sporting events, such as football. This money eventually found its way to the clubs, who chose to spend it on paying for the best players. In a roundabout kind of way, this helped to develop professionalism. Therefore, the Industrial Revolution helped to split the divide between amateurism and professionalism in sport. The Industrial Revolution also brought about improved working conditions for many of the people who lived in the towns and cities. This had an impact on health. Evidently, an increase in health has implications for sport. The Industrial Revolution also saw a change in the place and status of women in society. Suddenly, women, who were considered less able to work the fields and do the jobs in the pre-industrial society, as they were regularly manual or hard-working, heavy-lifting jobs, were now able to operate machinery as effectively as a male. This meant that the role of middle-class women changed and their status improved. That said, the knock-on effect was that the role and status of lower-class women diminished, as they were not seen as being as good or as talented as their middle-class counterparts. With the increased place and status came increased opportunity, and with the decreased place and status for those in the lower class, decreased opportunities arose. Middle-class women, for example, became able to play tennis and were in fact encouraged to do so, whereas the lower-class women had little or no participation in sport other than the mob games which their male counterparts may have continued to participate in. These games were not considered womanly by the standards of the new middle-class ladies, and therefore participation in them by women was frowned upon. The Industrial Revolution also brought with it a transport revolution. This had a major impact on society, as no longer were people confined to their rural villages. Travel became more commonplace, and people were able to get about more freely. This enabled a greater migration of people from the countryside into the city, seeking the jobs created during the Industrial Revolution, but it also impacted on sport. Now the concept of leagues could be developed, as teams were able to travel more frequently and over greater distances in order to participate in their sports. This helped sport to both spread and to develop over a much wider area. The Industrial Revolution also brought with it an increase in free time for the middle-class workforces and lower-class employees. Where work could previously be done in seasonal time, that is, when the harvest was at its peak, so too were the workloads, it was now conducted on a set time and day for a set period of time. The concept of a working week was introduced, and this allowed a greater amount of free time in which sport could be played. The advent of a half-day Saturday, paid holidays, and entitlement to a certain amount of time off enabled leagues to establish regular playing slots in which teams could compete. Equally, training could be conducted on a more regular basis. The final key influence of the Industrial Revolution was that it changed the views of the church. Where the church had previously been against the excesses of popular recreation, which often included rowdy behaviour, drunkenness and violence, it was much more tolerant of the more moderate approach which resulted from the Industrial Revolution. With increased law and order in society came increased control and law and order in sport, and this was welcomed by the church. What you must remember is that at the time the church was very important in many people's lives, much more so than it was today, and therefore doing something which was endorsed by the church would be seen as important. That being so, more organised sport, otherwise known as rational recreation, became a popular pastime for people who had an increasing free time. In simple terms, that explains the major impacts of the Industrial Revolution on society as a whole. Clearly, many of these impacts also influenced changes in sport. We will look more at these changes when we discuss rational recreation. That concludes the topic in 10 minutes on the Industrial Revolution.